Hello, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's Swimming Parent Support livestream from Propulsion Swimming. I'm your host, Scott, and with me, as always, is my good friend and co-founder of Propulsion Swimming, Dan, and our support act on these live streams, AP Race Club's Kev Pickard. How are we doing, gentlemen?
Yeah, very good, actually. It's a nice weekend. Makes a change, doesn't it? The storms have clearly passed by now, so it's a very nice weekend. How are you, Kev?
Yeah, really good. Really excited to, as I said, probably see some sunshine. I think it's been an alien concept to us for a little while in this country. So, it's going to be a good weekend, and looking forward to getting some good questions in from parents up and down the country.
Yeah. Yes. So on today's show, we are covering all of your questions about competitions and racing. So it's the time of year when your children might have open meets almost every weekend, regionals, nationals, and maybe even British champs might be approaching for a few. There might even be a few parents sitting on poolside as you're watching right now. And as we all know, racing is why we started the sport. It's fun. Dan, some of your best memories are from racing in cities like Sheffield and Eindhoven.
Oh, yeah, it's certainly the reason why I swam. I used to love racing, and to be honest, I still miss it now. I wish I could go back and do it now. But some of my best memories were meets from counties. Counties were one of my best memories from when you're younger, meeting up with friends from other clubs and just enjoying the competitive part of the sport. And even when you go to international meets, there's the fun challenge of racing other clubs from other countries and challenging yourself. So really, for me, it was the best part of the sport. It really was.
I want to point out you still can race, Dan. You could still go and do.
Yeah, but I'm not very good anymore, I imagine. So.
So for anyone who is joining for the first time, welcome. For those joining us again, thanks for coming back. As always, these streams are designed to be highly interactive. We've had some questions sent in ahead of time, but please submit any questions you've got to us about competitions and racing in the YouTube chat, and we will bring them up and do our best to answer them. This could range from technical advice, rules, the best places to race, honestly, anything and everything.
Yeah, literally get your questions and conversations flowing, because that's what it's literally all about, the community that we're trying to build here. The questions could be literally anything to do with racing, so please fire in a comment section.
Yes. So, guys, we had a really interesting case study come in ahead of time. So I'm going to use this as a chance to kind of address all the different aspects from it and start the conversation flowing. So the parent sent in and said, we have an 11-year-old swimmer, age 12 at the end of 2022, who is going to regionals for the first time. Depending on his events, he's currently ranked between the top 10 and 20 nationally. I'm wondering what his potential would be if he's at this level now. Would he have the chance to be a national swimmer? Do these situations change as he grows? His times rankings, can they move higher, lower? Or are they pretty much predictable based on where he is now? I'm also curious to know, should we focus on swimming being as his main sport, or let him try a wide range of sports at this stage and not focus too much on swimming? So guys, there's a lot to unpick there, but I actually think we can break it down into certain parts and hopefully help out a lot of people who are watching as well, rather than just this one parent. So I think the first part is, how can we judge a child's potential based on results at 11 years old? Will they end up to be a national level swimmer if they are national level at 11?
Do you want to go first?
Kev, you fire away. You're the expert.
I wouldn't call an expert, but I've certainly got, I guess, experience of both working with athletes of this age group, but also I was on that journey myself. I qualified for nationals at a very young age, came out of the sport and then came back in my 20s. So I can see it from lots of different angles. I think nobody can predict what's in the future. If we take my boss, Adam Peaty, he wouldn't have been in the top 10 in the county when he was 11 years old. No one could have predicted from his age. And then on the flip side of that, you've got athletes that have come through really early. Someone like Katie Ledecky, who won Olympic gold at the age of 15. So I think it's not about them as an age group, it's them as an individual and a person. And I think it's really challenging. And also there's a question as to, should we be making that decision for an 11-year-old? And from everything I've seen, I think the honest thing is to keep your options open. And I think you spoke to a swimmer recently who had that experience of having a number of sports, being very good at a number of sports. And actually, when it got to the T-junction, they were in their mid-teens when they made that decision and didn't have that decision made for them when they were young. Because if you ask a kid at that age what they want is probably going to be very different perhaps when they're 15, when they're 19, when they're 25. So I think it's keeping as many doors open as possible and not putting them on a single path, because ultimately you could then be disregarding potential other avenues that might pan out more brightly in the future.
Yeah, I think for me it's the development. You at 11 years old, you don't know how you're going to develop. For me, I was a slow sort of developer, slow burner. I didn't really get to my full sort of potential, if you like, or the full development until I was like 17, 18. And that's when really for me the time started to make results happen. Whereas some kids, they develop at the age of 13, and that's really when they peak. So it's a bit of a waiting game, to be honest. So you just got no idea just yet. It's almost like predicting the future. So it's pretty difficult. But I would agree with Kev. Keep doors open, because it's learning different motor skills and keeping the fundamental side of things enjoyable. So yes, I wouldn't solely focus on one sport, especially as an 11-year-old just yet. I would keep doors open.
So that kind of answers the second question at the same time. You don't need to quite focus down on swimming just yet.
And the success of a swimmer isn't measured by if you look back over a period of 10 or 20 years involved in a sport. For me, I've been competing for 25, 26 years by the end of this year. My successes are the fact that I'm still involved in the sport and still enjoy it and have a great circle of people around me. If someone said to you, what's the best thing you've taken from swimming? It would be the people that I've been on the journey with, not a particular competition or a national ranking or a national final or whatever it was. Actually, it was all the other stuff that perhaps you can't measure. That's the important stuff. And I think as not just our sport, all sports have a huge amount to offer young people, and actually at a young age, getting the opportunities to experience that is really, really powerful. And I think as much as is practicable, parents ask me, well, when should they specialize? And I say, well, it's logistically different for every parent. If you've got 4 kids and each of them does 4 sports, there's going to come a point where you can't do that anymore. So I think there's a lot of variation, if you like, from person to person. But yeah, keeping the doors open is a really good place to start, especially when they're that young.
Yeah, you don't want to have time to be the result of everything. I think that's the problem in this country, especially for swimming. Time is everything. Whereas what Kev is saying, the team around you, building that, we have lifelong friends, don't we? Still, sometimes we've recently been on Scott Stagg. I haven't seen some of the swimmers for 5 years, but it's like I've just seen them yesterday. And that's the sort of things that is a result. You've got friends for life, and it's not just about swimming fast at the age of 11. You don't get a professional 11-year-old swimmer. So I would keep doors open, keep involving yourself in other sports, because you just never know. Maybe tennis is the way forward. You just don't know.
Yeah, I mean, speaking of tennis, the case study that Kev kind of half mentioned to begin with is Duncan Scott. He played tennis till the age of 15 and was very successful at both sports. We've got a clip from our podcast, which I'm just going to play for everyone. Essentially, he talks about enjoyment was the reason that he swam at the age of 15, and that is what he thinks young swimmers should focus on.
Yeah.
So one thing we really wanted to bring up with you, it's almost a case study we've heard before.
Here we go.
It's your early your early years through swimming when you were 14, 15 and crossing over with playing tennis. So how important was it for you to keep doing another sport while you were in the sport so young? Because I know there will be a lot of 14, 50-year-olds listening who think, I need to put all my energy into swimming right now.
Yeah, I really enjoyed doing lots of different sports when I was younger. I personally think that's quite important, but I'm no expert in the youth, the development of junior athletes to senior athletes. But I just think I just found it really enjoyable, and I think at that age it's really important. Enjoyment most certainly comes first, and as it should all the way through. But and it allowed me to only do a limited number of sessions, in the pool. It meant that I couldn't do, a huge amount of training, because I'd be away, playing tennis or doing some other sports. So, I did really enjoy that element. But then, once the decision had to be made at some point, because, swimming's kind of hard to balance a lot of things. So, I took the decision purely on enjoyment and who I was doing it with, which I preferred that way.
So I mean that's a guy who was Olympic champion and the most successful Olympian that we've seen in the pool for GB, and he didn't specialize until he was 15. He very much balanced between tennis and swimming, and it was all about enjoyment for him.
And I think the other thing to think about as well is that individual part, because if you've got let's say a 12 or 13-year-old who they're in geographically the right place, they're near a program that's got the opportunities and they love swimming and they want to pour everything they have into swimming and have no interest in any other sports. I think that's a very different discussion to a kid that's doing 2 or 3 sports and enjoys doing 2 or 3 sports. Because I remember listening to Duncan's coach talk the year after, 2 years after he broke through, and he said when for anyone who obviously doesn't know Duncan's story, his coach has been with him all the way through his journey since he's been very young. And he said it was very obvious that he was going to have a T-junction, if you like, as a kid at some point, because he did multiple sports and he enjoyed them. So as a sport, our job was to make sure he fell in love with swimming. And that was how they approached it, made sure that as he was moving through those early teenage years, he was falling in love with it, so that when the T-junction appeared, he made the choice himself. And I think, especially if you look at, it's easy for us to reflect back, especially with the exceptional results that he's had in recent years, but actually it's right. Like at the end of the day, I can't think of many people, whether it's in swimming, another sport, or in life, that are going to do something for years and years and years if they absolutely hate it. And especially for a child, it's so important that formative experience for them is a really positive one. And if that's 1 sport, 2 sports, 5 sports, as long as it works logistically for the family and they enjoy it, then I don't see any reason to start worrying about that, especially when they're that young.
Yeah, absolutely. So we've had our first question into the chat, which is brilliant. Now, it was a topic I was going to leave to a little later on, but I think it's one that is going to get asked quite a lot, and it's all about racing suits and tech suits, because we know the money that is involved in them. What difference does it make? And we've discussed it before, Kev, and you made a really interesting point before. So let's go over it again.
Okay, well, it's a very short and sweet point. You can spend £300 on a race suit and throw it in the pool and it doesn't swim. And I think ultimately it's the person underneath. It's everything from their nutrition to their psychology to their land training to their skills in the pool to their behaviors and traits around their approach to swimming. That makes up 99.99999% of the swimmer. And then there's a little cherry that you put on top of the cake with the suit. Now, I think the thing is as well, some counties, clubs and parts of the country have already banned them for youngsters, because ultimately they're not just a cost aspect. They're not designed for that. They're designed for performance senior athletes. And I think that the challenge is, especially for a swimmer that's going on their journey, you want to not hold them back. That's probably not the best wording, but actually wait as long as possible to start adding more things. Because if you get to 15 and you're already doing 10 sessions a week and you've got all the support and you've got the suit and you've got everything, where do you go from there? And I think, when I started my previous job, I remember visiting at the time, we had quite a few national centres, and every single coach I spoke to there was like, the worst thing we can have is an athlete that comes to us and they're doing everything already, because you can't do more when someone's already doing 10 out of 10 on everything. So it's not just for racing suits. I think that's for everything. Be logical and methodical in when you add stuff. And if you don't need it, if it's not a necessity, and like I say, a suit doesn't do the swimming, the swimmer does the swimming. And that's a real challenge to get into people's heads. But, I coached a young lad when he was an age grouper who went on to do very, very well as a youth and senior swimmer. And actually, I remember watching him at 14 years old, winning 6 golds at nationals in a pair of Speedos. And it was quite galling to all the swimmers around him. Like, well, how'd you do that? And it's like, because he trains really, really well. He's extremely skilled and he's got a fantastic mindset. That's why he's a good swimmer. And I think too often, if you put all that pressure on the suit and then it doesn't go well, where do you go with that? So for me, hold it back as long as possible. And then once you're a pro swimmer, you get them for free anyway.
That's true. Through sponsors, yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah, I was going to say the word pressure. You don't want any extra pressure or relying on the suits to get the results that you want. Whereas actually you need to do the stuff behind the scenes in the pool every day. That's where the results really come in. And then the suit is, it does help you, but it's more of a placebo in my head for some reason, So I would wait. The processes are the most important thing at a young age. Get the technique right, then build the stamina, then the speed, and then if you're doing really well and you're still enjoying the sport, which is the main real talking point here, then you can get the suits at the, let's say, late teens or something like that, and then see where you go from there.
I think it's something that we're really almost reliant on in this country. I think you see it all over the place. You see even like Arena League and Speedo League. I remember when we were swimming Speedo League, we weren't wearing racing suits for that. It was a bit of fun after training on a Saturday. Whereas now you see them all in their tech suits. It just, yes, it looks very professional and it looks like they've all taken it very seriously. But at 13, 14, 15, again, you're not winning Olympics.
Yeah, I just wonder if it's because you used to have the super suit era from back in 2008, 2009, whether that we're still living in that sort of mindset era, if you like. And maybe it will take another 10 years to get out of, actually, we don't need these super suits. They're actually a complete, they're completely in the past now and you don't need them. Because we've actually spoken to Alicia, haven't we? And she said she basically only swims three competitions a year, isn't it? I think we got a clip, actually. I think Scott found the clip again. Play the clip. Yeah, go on.
You have 3 key meets throughout the year where you suit up. The rest of them, you don't. The rest of them, you're in your training costume competing. So, yeah, so all the dual meets I've done have been in my training costume.
So, I mean, it's a very quick clip, but that's Alicia Wilson, who's training out in California, in America, in the most high pressure environment that America has, college swimming, and she's racing in training suits.
Yeah, three meets a year, and that's of course including like the big ones of like Worlds, for example. All the other ones is in training suits. So actually, it's process driven rather than she's not looking for times as of right now. I mean, yes, she will be when it comes to champs, of course, but in the other meets, it's just about finding maybe the right technique on a certain, or the pacing on the first 50 meters of fly because she's a 200 IM swimmer or something like that. I mean, that will come from her coach. But yes, I wouldn't be too heavily reliant on these suits. It's not needed right now.
So we've had a response to the Duncan bit, which Kev, I think you want to address.
Yeah, I think, and it's a really interesting point. It's a really difficult situation that a lot of parents are put in. Now, I think the word performance is bandied around a lot. I would argue, and it's probably hugely controversial, there aren't performance children out there. Certainly in our sport, we might label it performance, but it's not. If you get up in the morning and you go training for 3 hours, you have a sports massage, a nutritionist, a psychologist, you come back in the afternoon, you get paid to do it, and you're an adult, that's a professional performance athlete. And 11, 12, 13-year-olds is a child. And I think it's actually asking what kind of environment do we want to be in? And I think that's not anyone's choice. That needs to be the individual's choice. Is that the environment I want to be in? Because if the point is, as a young person, I want to do sport A, sport B, and sport C, and the environment says you can't do that, well, actually, is that the right environment for you to be in? And I think the often fear is that perhaps we go, well, we can't do it anywhere else because actually that's the program. And I think if you were in a school situation, let's take a school, for example, and a teacher had said to your child, you have to do this, and we if you don't like it, you can leave. Parents would be all over that, going, that's unacceptable, like, et cetera, and they would either move classes or move schools. But in sport, we can get a bit territorial over those sorts of things and worried that it'll be looked down upon. But being selfish, it's not about anyone else. It's about the kid and their experience as a child, because the volume of churn, if you like, in our sport of kids that feel like they get to a T-junction where it's performance or leave, as opposed to no, that's not where we are. It's a roundabout, and there's maybe 10 different routes off it. And I'm mindful of obviously different clubs in different parts of the country. I've spoke to clubs up in Scotland where the nearest club is over a mountain. Where I'm based, I can drive half an hour in each direction and probably get to 30 different clubs. So I think it's an individual discussion to have. But I have to say, based on everything I've seen and the vast majority of athletes out there, are going to get to a point where actually it doesn't matter what the system says they have to do. What do you want to do? Because if you don't want to do something and you're forced to do it, eventually you'll leave anyway. So it's just fast tracking that process. So that's from what I've seen. And the other thing as well, listen back to that clip with what Duncan said. It's actually about being brave enough as a coach, as the parents in that situation, and as the swimmer to go, actually, I'm okay. I'm all right doing what I'm doing now, and I'm having fun and I'm enjoying it. Because it doesn't matter if the kid's breaking the world record, if they leave at 18 because they hate the sport, what kind of experience is that? And I think there's a lot of senior athletes would reflect back on some very difficult decisions they made, but actually it led to longevity in the sport. And that clip from Duncan is a great example of that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Let's take a look at kind of supporting our swimmers who are racing. So, what do I do after my swimmer has had a disappointing competition?
It's a great question.
Yes, go on, Kev. Go on.
I think we could probably unpick that a layer, because yes, there's bigger competitions and smaller competitions, but everything's got to be taken in context. If that disappointing competition is the middle of September and it's club championships 2 weeks into the season, that's probably a very different discussion to it's at the Olympic trials and you come third and you didn't make the Olympic team. So, I think there has to be some context there. And I think that's almost one of the challenges, is actually trying to keep things in context and saying, if it's kind of like a wave that goes up and down. And ultimately, every competition, we kind of push that peak of expectation higher and higher and higher. When it doesn't go well, which it will at some point not go well, because that's the sport, the drop becomes much bigger. Whereas I've watched swimmers do incredible things, but then continue with their process, if you like. So, I remember being on poolside 2015 when PT broke the world record. Then he got out, and he went and did a swim down, and the next morning he was back at the pool doing a warm-up. Now, we can go into layers of all of those sorts of things, but I do think when it comes to managing disappointment, a lot of it comes to what precedes that, in how we put expectation on us doing well and how we deal with things not going so well. And if we get that language right of, actually, I'm going to go to the meet and do my best, if the answer is, did you do your best, and that's it, then does it not matter what the outcome is? Because of course the outcome does matter for a lot of youngsters, but we need to make sure that language is consistent. Because if you go to a meet with expectations of PBing every time, my favorite thing that I say to parents, if your kids PB'd every time, they would eventually get to 0. That would be their PB.
Yeah.
So at some point, PBing isn't going to be the metric that we need to use. And actually, we develop technically, we develop socially within our teams, we develop strategically by working with our coaches and all these other things. And I think actually those need to be the measures that we're looking at, so that when we come away from a meet, yes, there'll be areas for development, but actually even the worst meets, you can still take something away from. So yeah.
Yeah, it really depends what the disappointing factor is. If it is not PBing, it's really not the end of the world. It's got to be process driven. If we're talking about, let's say, that 11-year-old, for example, the processes will be to do the underwaters, maybe not breathe last 5, not breathing after the turn, breathing bilaterally, whatever it is. If they're doing all of those and they've ticked all those boxes, actually, I think that's a bit of a result. That's successful for me. I mean, if you've missed your PB by 0.3 and it's, you're just not breaking 30 for 53 or something like that, it's really not the end of what you're going to break 30 at some point. But if you carry on ticking those boxes, you'll eventually get there. I think you have to fail first to then get anything out of it. And so if you don't fail, I mean, the very best athletes fail at everything. Michael Jordan goes on about it all the time, about how many hoops he's missed, thousands and thousands, but you're remembered for like the 5, So it's just the same as that. So keep doing the processes. Don't worry about the time, and just keep enjoying it. And try and stay positive. Find the positives out of every single race.
Yeah, make sure that the language leading up to an event is built around those sorts of things. So if we're going to an event, is what we're setting as an expectation within our control. So let's say, for argument's sake, I want to, win a race. Going to go to meet A this weekend, whatever it is, and I want to win the 100 freestyle. It's not in my control. We all know Laszlo Che, one of the most famous swimmers of all time, incredible athlete, just happened to come through at the same time that Michael Phelps came through in the same event. Doesn't make him any less of a swimmer. So I think you can't control certain aspects of it. So don't focus your energies into those sorts of things. What can you control? Well, this weekend, I'm going to try to, just as like Scott said, making sure we're doing your streamlines off the wall, you're focusing on whatever the other things are, but they're things that you can control, so that when you come away from the meet, the response or the disappointment is, I didn't do what I'd asked of myself, as opposed to I didn't do something that was actually completely out of my control, because I think that's an unfair pressure for kids and adults that are swimming to put on themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this question and kind of both your responses lead really nicely into the next question, which is, why is the performance of my child plateauing? So why does plateau happen? And are there certain ways to break out of it? I know me and Dan have a few from our previous conversations. So let's first start on, why does plateau happen?
Go on, Dan.
Well, I think we've spoken about it before, to be honest with you. If you're doing everything all at once and then you maybe move to another program, there's nothing else to add on. So it's all about progression for me. So if you're doing 10 sessions a week, you can't then add in 11 or 12 because that will inevitably cause burnout, and then you're going to leave the sport because then the plateauing won't happen. You actually go downhill all of a sudden. So it's got to be all about progression, whether it's nutrition, land training, add in more core exercises, anything like that. Because if you do everything all at once, I know a swimmer right now who's like 12 and he's doing 8 sessions a week and doing 16 hours, and you just think, it's not going to be good. Short term, brilliant. He might, hit national times, maybe even be national champion one day. But when it comes to 18, there's nothing else to add on. And that's when plateauing happens, unfortunately. So, yeah, just keep it, I don't know, start easy, same as anything. Start easy and then gradually increase the intensity and meterage, etc., etc. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay.
I'd say sometimes it comes from focusing from one event a little bit too much. So
Maybe,
you can get really fixated. It certainly happened to me, and it's why I dropped out of the sport. I got fixated on my 100 free time, and all I raced at every meet was 100 free. And that was terrible for me. Essentially, that is why I left swimming for about 5-6 years. What we've spoken to is like Ed Mildred will swim loads of different events, and by the age of 18, he still doesn't really know what his main event is because he's throwing 200 IMs, and he needed a break from a certain event, so he threw in a 400 IM. It's very much keeping doors open and almost not focusing on one race, especially when you're young.
Adam's very recently, last weekend, actually in Marseille, he's just done 200 breaststroke. I'm not sure how well it went, actually. I think, pretty good, I suppose, but it's a bit of a fun element to it because he's trying to lengthen his stroke. The technique is still not quite there. He's done power-based stuff, I believe, Kev, you'll know more than us, but he's just doing it for a little bit of fun, a little bit of something different, just to keep his mind engaged, another bit of a challenge. Because if he carries on doing, when was the last time he PB'd, Kev? Probably like 2 years ago? Something like that?
So he broke the world record at the 2019 World Champs in the 100s. But I think even at 2019 winter when we did the ISL when it was in London, he swam 100 free in the relay. And that happened a number of times at the ISL. And it's like, well, why would you do that? And it's like, because that's how you keep the variety and stuff. And he doesn't just turn up to the training, dive in and swim 100 breaststroke 10 times and then get back out and go home and do that every day. I think one of the other things, and I'd go back a step on this plateauing stuff, it's perfectly normal. Adam didn't PB on 100 breaststroke between the 2016 Olympics and the 2018 European Championships. A 2-year period in his best event, he didn't PB on. And that's the Olympic champion. So I think it's 100% normal. And I would almost be concerned if you don't have a plateau. Because like I said, if you keep constantly getting quicker, eventually you get to zero. So a plateau is a normal part of human development because ultimately swimming is not just all we do. So if you take a standard week, 160 plus hours in a week, at most someone's going to be swimming 10, 15, possibly 20 hours if they're maybe a senior. Therefore, a lot of other stuff is going on. They're growing, they're developing, they've got exams when they're at school, social lives, potentially other sports. And actually that takes energy and everything else. And I'm not saying stop doing everything and just focus on swimming. But what I'm saying is that swimming is not the be all and end all. When you're a young child, there's lots of other parts of your life and the human that's developing. And that sometimes will have an impact on swimming. And that's okay. And I think just actually having that conversation with your children to say, it's okay if you go to a meet and you don't PB, just saying that, actually explicitly telling them that, is they can go, oh, okay, I still want to PB. There's nothing wrong with having that ambition to do well. But I think the feeling that a kid has when they touch the wall and they know the response they get is based on what comes up on the scoreboards is a really dangerous place to be, because ultimately the kid ties their value as to whether they're PBing. And then when they don't PB, they feel less valued and then they stop. And that's the general pattern in our sport. Years ago, they did a study, I think it was 2006 to 2012, and they tracked the top 100 12-year-olds for a 6-year period. And when they got to the 18-year-olds, there was 5% of those kids left. And you think it's not rocket science. And yes, you're going to have kids that naturally decide swimming isn't for them, or they pick up other sports and whatever else it is. But ultimately, it shouldn't be the sports that causes it. It should be other decisions in their life. So I think allowing a plateau to happen is fine. It's normal, and they'll get through it and they'll come out the other side.
Well, it's kind of worrying that we've just seen the word plateau and just automatically gone to time. So
it's true.
That's the other side. That's the part of the problem, isn't it? Whereas, you could say plateau and they're not adding an extra kick off the walls, or, maybe instead of not breathing last 5 meters, they could extend it to 8 meters. something like that. That's where, it's weird how we just look at time for plateauing when it could be other processes as well. But yeah,
it's very true. Right, a technical question that came in ahead of time. What is tapering? And is it done for every competition? And I'll add another bit, because this is for parents of swimmers. What age do you start tapering? Because I know when I was racing till the age of like 16, I don't think I ever tapered. Not one bit.
This is do you want to go first?
No, I went first last time. Go on.
Okay. It's an interesting one. I didn't do my first taper till I was 21. So, I'm sure, again, there's coaches out there probably going, yeah, please say what you're about to say. And what I'm going to say is the vast majority of young children are not and should not be doing enough work to warrant tapering. And the second part of that is, even if they are doing 15 hours a week, the rest of their week is probably where their taper is going to come from, going to bed half an hour earlier, making sure they're, not overloading themselves in the week running up to a major event. There's only so much you can do with that pool time that they've got. And actually, a taper can occur naturally within the program. So you might do some more focused work running into a main event, and that's going to be up to the coach. That's not for an athlete or parent to suddenly go, oh, we're taking the week off to rest for next week. And it's like, did you not think the coach has probably already planned for that? And allowed for that in the volume and intensity of training that they're doing? But I think number one, tapering is effectively reducing an aspect of training, whether that's volume, intensity, number of sessions. It could be, everyone has the different ways of changing, I guess, intensities running into a major meet, but it's done very rarely. Big top level athletes, once, maybe twice a year, depending on where their major events are. But realistically, for the vast majority of youngsters out there, their rest is going to come from other areas other than the pool. And if you actually look at the lifestyle that most people have and map out their weeks, there's a lot of stuff that is actually kind of choice. And when you come up to a major event, maybe on the Friday night, we shouldn't do cross country. In the same way, and swimming, people might be sitting there going, why are you saying this? But actually, during exam periods for, like, let's say your second year of A-levels, actually, you might have a conversation with your coach saying, look, 1 week I've got 5 morning exams. So can I do all the evenings and have a couple of mornings off, or whatever it is? Now, that's a discussion to, again, have with your coaches. But ultimately, it's what are you tapering for? Because if you're doing it to get enough rest and enough recovery, you should already be getting enough rest and recovery as part of your program. It shouldn't be like once a week, once a year, you have that opportunity. So yeah, I have, I guess, an experience of that as an adult. And I think it works very well with seniors when you're doing enough volume. But when you're a youngster, most of it will come from everything else.
Yeah, it's interesting because the club we were at, I remember almost before every level 1 meet that we did, if we traveled around the country, there would be groups of parents who would hold their swimmers out for that week. They wouldn't turn up. And we're talking like 15-year-olds here. 14, 15-year-olds didn't turn up for a week because there was a level 1 and they thought, oh, we need to rest. Suddenly it was this hot topic of, oh, let's rest our kids. But actually, I went to training all that week and we did the hardest set that I've ever done, 750s, and I swam the best I ever swam that weekend. So the coach obviously knew what he was doing if we turned up.
Yeah, I think at a young age as well, I think that your body will automatically recover anyway. Again, the intensity is not going to be high. I imagine a lot of it is just aerobic capacity. So it's, your body will recover quite quickly. But I think a lot of people get confused with just having a very easy week just before the competition, whereas a taper, especially at the elite end, can last 2, 3, 4 weeks, depending on your event. So it's, for these younger ones, it's all about the development from age 11 all the way through to 18, that age group sort of band. And then when you reach that senior level, that's really when the tapering should be kicking in. It's a little bit confusing with maybe people who've just joined the swimming world or sport world, that tapering is just having a week off before the main competition, when really it's actually just reducing the intensity, reducing the hours. And again, if you're not doing the massive amounts of hours in the pool anyway or in the gym, it shouldn't make too much distance anyway, with Scott being a great example, just there doing 750s just before. So, yeah.
Another interesting question. Should I record my daughter's races for feedback?
Ooh.
Feedback from who would be my question straight back to that.
Okay.
Because if it's that the swimmer says, can you record my races so I can watch my swimming back, and they're quite analytical, fine. But the last thing a swimmer wants is to get a debrief, if you like, on their swims when they're either sitting in the car or they get home from either their parents, siblings, anyone else. The only person that should be doing that is the coach. And I think it's a real challenge, because ultimately, if you look at the pie chart of the things that make up an athlete, there are certain things that a qualified coach should be doing, and that's the coaching element. But there's a lot of things they can't do. They can't provide perhaps the mum and dad love and affection that a child needs from their parents. The coach doesn't feed them, because that's, they don't drive them around. All of those other aspects. So I think it's understanding what your roles are and absolute clarity on that. However, as I said, if you've got a kid that is really interested and wants to see their races, or says, the coach has asked me if someone can record my races so we can have a chat about it at the pool, fine.
That's a different thing.
Yeah, that is a very different thing. But the last thing, there's so many different sports have started to deal with this, of what's the journey home and the feedback that they get, and they dread that often more than the competition or event. Rugby's a sport that's done it really, really well recently, put a huge amount of work into understanding that the journey home is the decompression for the child, not the debriefing time. Yeah. And I think that's a real challenge. But actually, as the adults in the equation, both coaches and parents, we need to have absolute clarity as to what we're there for, and make sure we're doing those bits really, really well, instead of trying to fix and step into, if you like, the coach's role, when actually that's not what we're there for.
Yeah, I imagine if a swimmer's watching themselves in the back in the car on the way back from the competition, they're not really looking at any technical sort of stuff, whether they've taken, how many breaths per length if it's a sprint event. They're probably just going to look where they're positioned in the pool and hoping, well, if I went that little bit faster, just because Jimmy in lane 2 went that faster, maybe I could have won the race. That's pretty much all they'd be looking at. They wouldn't be looking at the processes. So yes, feedback is a bit vague, to be honest with you. I think these kids will just look at where they're positioned in the pool rather than the technical elements, which the coach would then provide after the race, or should be providing after the race anyway.
Yeah, actually, I think it's something I'd like to dive into on a video on our channel, is almost how to give feedback. So how do you break down your race? So if you're watching a video of yourself, what you actually want to look at, rather than picking apart yourself, whether there are positive aspects that you need to look at. So strokes per length, that sort of thing. Because a lot of kids, if they're given a recording of themselves, like Dan said, will have no education on what they're looking for. So maybe it is a case of the coach, if they are going to review their swim with the swimmer, the coach really needs to approach it and really help the swimmer understand what we're looking for. These are the aspects that we're really looking for. And I think we could do that great on a video on our channel.
Well, it all stems from what the coach is trying to drill into their swimmers in the training beforehand, the weeks and months beforehand, because otherwise it's good doing a video, I suppose, but then the coach will want to know what's different elements thereafter, So, yeah, I like the idea of filming the races, as long as it's got a positive outcome and not just looking at positions. Again, it's all based on time, really, isn't it? So yeah.
Yeah, I just think a bit of education is needed around what the recording's for, essentially, before you just hand over a video of the swim.
Yep.
Right, next question. Bit of a tough one. Meals that I should be preparing leading up to a gala. Now, I think this one is going to be more looking at other resources than our knowledge.
I would imagine so, yes. I mean, I don't think we're any experts on nutrition whatsoever. I mean, we've got the basics of, you need your carbs, you need your protein, you need your fats. But outside of that, what specific, I imagine the question really is what specific meals you need. I mean, as long as you've got the standard carbs, protein, a little bit of fats, get your fruit and veg in, make sure you're hydrated. Really, that's all it is. I used to grow up thinking I need to carbo load the week before to get the energy stores in. Then hopefully by the weekend I'll have loads of energy and I'll perform at my best. Whether that worked or not, I've got no idea. Maybe it's a bit of a placebo, but I think as long as you're eating the right sort of stuff, as you normally should be doing anyway, there shouldn't really be needing to change your nutrition or meals in the lead up to a gala anyway.
So I think one of the things for me, again, having been in this world for a little while now, is it's what you do on average that counts. And I think, and I'll happily put my hand up and say I nicked that off our resident nutritionist on the AP Plus education platform. And that was from Jazz. And she said, it's across a year you set your habits for when it really matters. So if you've had bad habits all year, what you eat in the week leading up to it is going to make zero difference, and vice versa. If you've had an amazing year, then that week leading up to it is just business as usual. And I think that's something to look at, is actually, yes, you're going to have maybe off seasons and Christmas and things like that, where actually you might not be as strict as you may choose to be when you're, say, like Adam, for example, as a senior athlete who really does have a sharp meal plan. But for the youngsters out there, just make sure they're having a balanced amount of stuff leading up to it. And I think that what's more important is actually the educational piece. So over a period of a month, 6 months, a year, even on like AP Plus, I think it has 2 years worth of education around nutrition. And actually it's done in little chunks, because trying to fix everything in the last week leading up to it probably adds more stress to the situation as opposed to less. And to be honest, I genuinely believe that what's on average that counts, because when you stand behind the block, you're a product of how on average you've trained, how you've slept, how you've eaten, what your S&C's like, what your psychology's like, all of that. And that isn't formed in a week. That's formed over a period of months and years leading up to that. And that's why when people ask how some of our swimmers, we had an amazing Olympics last year, can do all these amazing things, because they've been practicing for that for their whole lives leading up to that point. That wasn't a surprise. It was their ability to replicate what they've been doing week in, week out when it mattered. And I think that's, you could say that with nutrition, psychology, skills, and any other aspects of swimming.
That'll be the same with snacks during the meet as well, I think. It's like you've got loads of time to practice at, let's say, club champs. Counties is happening as of right now. Brilliant time to practice what's best for you. Everyone's going to be different. Some people have popcorn, for example, anything, have sandwich, pasta, whatever it is, it's going to affect people differently. So it's a good chance to trial and error. If it works one weekend, trial again for the next competition and see if it works. And if it does work, then obviously that's what works for you, and carry on doing that throughout the year or throughout the rest of the years,
Yeah, I love this. Most of your 2 responses to pretty much all of the questions so far, which have been specific in places, is look at the broader picture. Essentially, racing doesn't take place by itself. Racing is the accumulation of all of the processes that you practice all through the season, and it's the enjoyment bit. The racing is the enjoyment bit. So if you're looking at changing something just for racing, look back at the whole of your process throughout the whole season.
Years ago, I remember sitting in a presentation from Ben Proud's coach, and everyone was obsessing at that point. I was still coaching full time at that point over how good Ben Proud's start was. And somebody asked, how has Ben got that good a start? And his coach said, when he stands up on the block, it's an Olympic final every single time. There's no average dives ever. If he does a dive, it's perfect, and that is it. There's no ever chatting away to your friends or not listening to what you're doing or kind of just flopping into the pool. Every single dive is spot on, so that when you get to the big meet, it's spot on, and people see the beautiful performance and go, wow, how's he done that? And it's like, with practice, the same as anything else that anyone's ever gotten good at. So I think that's what I would say there. But specific to the meal stuff, I think just make sure across the year, the average is good, and just keep that pattern.
Repetition.
I was going to say, leading on from that point, actually, Ben Proud thing, it's something that we got taught at Gloucester, which was every time you push off a wall is a chance to practice your touch turns. So it's little things like that, isn't it?
Yeah, again, it's repetition. Touch turns, Dolphin, loads of stuff. How many strokes did you per length per 25? Let's just say 12, 13, and how many meters or how many lengths do you do per session? I mean, how many times are you going to do a catch? How many times are you going to do a breaststroke kick if you're doing breaststroke? It's in the thousands per week. So you're having plenty of time to do it, but it's just got to make sure you're switched on the whole time. But I mean, like Kev was saying, it's nutrition, it's psychology, it's everything else to do with it. It's all repetition, and just make sure you absolutely nail it every single time.
Okay, back to racing. And Dan, I'm sure this one's a sore one with you. How often should my child race? More than they are right now.
I mean, I like the idea of racing. I say as much as possible, but as of right now, I think we're lucky to race maybe once a month. Would I be fair in saying that? I like the idea of, this is going slightly higher in age, but like going to America and with college system, they're racing once a week, once every 2 weeks. And the difference is quite phenomenal. We got NCAAs coming up, and you'll see that these guys have no pressure of racing. They don't feel, it's almost like just an everyday thing. And we don't have that over here. We have open meets once a month if you're lucky, and you can see these kids getting nervous. And I think they should be racing as much as possible. But I know it's difficult to get to these places. I know COVID's been a problem as well, obviously. And these entries are not getting cheaper. And we always go on saying you shouldn't be specializing, so you try and do the whole thing. So it ends up being a very expensive meet with petrol, with food, with hotels if you're going far afield. It can be a very expensive thing. But I would race quite often just to hone in the skills. Basically, you don't do much diving practice, I imagine, and that could be the place to practice diving. I don't know, but I would race a lot.
Well, and it's fun. That's the reason everyone swims, is to race. It's good fun.
Yeah,
I think for me, it's definitely making sure that you're racing for a reason, but that reason can be to have fun. But, and I say it, you mentioned there about having other sports and stuff like that. And I also think, and it's not just from the swimming point of view, I know this is a parent support talk, but actually there's a lot of coaches that are also parents. And I think out there, we can get to a point where we have 30 weekends of racing in a 52-week calendar. Now, for me, that's insane, because actually most of those meets are 12-hour days. They're not sociable, all of those sorts of things. And there's a cost. And also there's a well-being and a mental health aspect to all of this as well. But that's not to say you can't race regularly. You know, there's nothing wrong with saying once every 4 weeks, our Friday night is going to be a race night. There's nothing wrong with saying we're going to go to meets that are done and dusted in 3 hours. You know, one of the most enjoyable competitions is the National League, you know, because it's done and dusted, short, sharp. It's got a fun element to it, doesn't take up everybody's day. And the cost element, relatively speaking, to other meets is tiny. So I think it's actually looking, and there's probably a much bigger question there about the sport. And without going too much into details, you know, that's one of the things we're doing with Adam and his team, is actually looking at creating some different style competitions, because, you know, is it surprising that a kid that's doing 450s at a meet and it takes 12 hours to get 450s in? You know, if you're doing a race night on a Friday night, it can be done and dusted in 2 hours. Why would you go to a meet for 12 hours to do the same thing? And when you go back to school on Monday, they say, what did you do at the weekend? Oh, well, I sat at a competition for 12 hours on Saturday for about 2.5 minutes of racing. And they're like, what?
Yeah.
You mad? It'd be like having a 90-minute football game that you spent the entire day at the stadium for, just to watch the 90 minutes of football. And it's, I think for me, it's there's a much bigger question there around how the sport is structured, but we can get into that another point. But I think as much as they want to, and works for the family logistically, cost wise, and interest wise, because you can hammer January through, I don't know, to April, and they might be bored because actually they've done it too much. And that's, again, a judgment call for parents to make.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I like the team aspect is the best part of racing for me. So like you said, the Arena League, what we used to know as Speedo League, that was the most fun. So I'd love to see more of those competitions kind of pop up in places. I know there are a lot for juniors. I think around here, is it like the Cotswold League?
Oh yeah.
There's lots of little meets like that, and I think those are the best meets because they're over in an evening. They're the most fun.
Or just making every Friday, like Kev was saying, turn that into not a club champs, but just a race session. Effectively, it kind of is a club champs, and get the whole club in on a Friday night, Saturday morning, whatever day it is, and we're all going to re-racing let's do the hundreds, and they'll be done in 2 hours across the whole club, you know, give or take, and that's classes as a competition unofficially, but it classes as a competition. So yeah, I mean, just include it. Depends on different clubs; they might already be implementing that. Got no idea, but I think it's a really good idea just to get the race skills firing, get them honed in, and get them practiced.
Little technical one on racing, which won't take long. What's the difference between a level 1 and a level 2 meet?
Oh, Kev will know this, or explain it better than me.
So it all comes down to licenses. So licensing is the way that the rankings of times is governed in this country. So a level 1 is carried out in a 50-meter pool. And it's not just the size of the pool, there are restrictions over how many officials you've got. There's rules on the length of a session. There's lots of technical jargon that we could get into. A level 2 standard example would be something like an Arena League. Certainly in the division I swam in, it was licensed to level 2. But again, it's slightly different requirements to a level 1. Then you've got a level 3, and then you've got a level 4. Level 4 is, I guess, there's the least restrictions on it. So ultimately, all of these, not restrictions, like rules and regulations to allow a level 1, 2, and 3 and 4 meet to take place. 4 is the least amount of restrictions. Level 1 would be considered British Championships, a long course open meet to qualify for the nationals. The regionals are a level 1 meet, stuff like that.
Yeah, you need a qualifying time to get into the level 1s more so than level 4, pretty much. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, to a point, but also the actual way that the meet is structured. Forget for a second the process of the swimmer getting in there. The actual meet itself is defined as a level 1 meet by the way it's structured, and then how you get into it usually is up to the club that's operating it to actually set those parameters. But there is restrictions of upper times, lower times, where the times are from, how long you've had them, those sorts of things. But it's nothing too much to worry about. Effectively, it's just a progressive thing from 4 to 1. One's the biggest meets.
Yeah.
So unless anyone has any more questions into the live chat, we will start rounding things up with a few sort of racing technical questions. So I'm going to kick things off with, my child does a lot of underwater kicks, dolphin kicks off turns in races, but actually tends to go slower than those around them. Should he stop doing underwater kicking? Dan, I'm going to throw this at you.
I'm going to go with no. Just look at the top end of the sport. Caleb Dressel is known for winning races because of the underwater dolphin kick. Underwater streamline underwater dolphin kick is the fastest way to travel through the water. So actually using that, if you're doing that from the very get-go at the age of, let's say, 11, then if you keep on doing it week in, week out, by the age of 18, you're going to be pretty good at it, I would imagine. And so I would, again, I mean, going slower, it's all time-based again. I mean, I would say if you saw an 11-year-old doing 5-6 kicks off every wall, I think that's actually great coaching, and I'd be really impressed. Yeah, the fact that they're taking in this information and actually implementing it in training, I see that as a very good result that they're actually doing it. So I would not be worried about that at all. Don't worry about that they're being beaten. Just it's a long-term thing to improve that underwater dolphin kick. So give it time because it will pay dividends in the end.
Exactly what he said.
What kind of dive technique is best for racing? I know this is quite hard to describe on a visual or talking platform, but do you go for height?
I'm actually going to stand up in my chair now and demonstrate, and then you'll hear it.
That'd be fun.
So I think everyone has their own approach on it. If you look at some of the best starters in the world, both on backstroke in the water and off the dive, and on relay takeovers, everyone has their own way of doing things, and a lot of that will come down to their physiology, how they've been coached, whether they're ever had an injury or anything like that, and also what they're comfortable doing. So there isn't a single best kind, otherwise everyone would do exactly the same. However, there are some basic principles that are relatively well known. Ultimately a dive, even though we look at it going that way, it's a jump. So mechanically there are better ways to jump. From an entry point of view, a streamlined position is the best way to hit the water. Can you practice some of those things on land? Yes, you can. Without going too much on the AP Plus stuff, I think the first 4 weeks of the S&C program is how to improve your streamline position, because every length you either push off the wall or at the start of a race you dive in. So if you improve your streamline position, you improve your swimming speed.
Yep.
And it's things like that for me is kind of what I would factor in when I'm looking at a dive. I'm not looking to rip someone's dive to pieces and completely change it. I'm saying, right, here's where you are, here's where we'd like to get to, and then what works for the individual. And that's a coach's choice to make that based on the individual.
Yeah, you've got two types of dives. You've got this track and you've got the grab, haven't you? And with the backboard on these blocks now, especially at these level 1 meets or maybe even level 2 actually, they're all track starts. And I've always taught kids that I would rather do track start because it's the slightly quicker one, maybe off the block. Whereas the grab start is the more powerful because you're using both your legs at the same sort of time. So maybe you go further using a grab, but then you're quicker using a track. So I kind of leave the choice up to the swimmers, and they always choose speed. So that's just the way it is now. You just use track all the time. So, but yeah, I mean, you look at Caleb Dressel, and he uses his arms to sort of fling himself over. He almost does like a fly stroke in midair, and it kind of helps with propelling him through the air. So I think a lot of the swimmers are now kind of replicating that because he gets so much spring off the block. Which can be practiced in land training with the plyometric jumps and squats and stuff like that. So yes, I would go for a track start for a bit of speed.
I just think one more thing to add in there as well is a fast movement off the block isn't necessarily the best. And and I'm still there's people going, "What are you talking about?" But actually, if you rush the movement and you have a poor position off the block, then when you're in the air and you're going into the water, your body position could be all over the place. So actually thinking about what you're doing and learning the intricacies of a dive. I remember watching 2 hours at a European holding camp a few years ago of Ben Proud teaching people how he dives, and I was just like mesmerized by how much detail he knew about every aspect of it. And you're like, it's done and dusted in like half a second off the block. But actually he could think, right, I do this, I do this, I do this, I do this. And that comes from years of practice. So when they're young, again, just getting them to understand the basics is really useful, and just speak to the coaches.
Absolutely. Well, guys, thank you so much for both of you coming on today's Swimming Parent Support live stream. And thank you so much for everyone who's interacted in the live chat and sent in lots of really good questions beforehand. Racing, competitions, enjoy it. Enjoy this part of the swimming, essentially. Your kids will be having a lot of fun at competitions.
Well, like I said at the beginning, that's where most of my best memories of swimming have come from, especially at counties. So yes, get them involved in swimming. They're going to love it. And then once they enjoy it, then hopefully they stay in the sport longer. Then who knows where they go on. They might be the next Adam Peaty. You've got no idea. So we'll good luck to those swimmers.
Fantastic. And I'd say to anyone as well, as you're getting older, especially for the senior swimmers out there looking at stuff like Bucks with the university swimming program and the seniors at Masters now, so 18 to 24, that has ballooned in terms of the amount of people doing it because it's good fun. And if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about it, then I don't know what will.
Yeah. Yep. So I hope everyone has enjoyed this week's Swimming Parent Support live stream from Propulsion Swimming. We have just launched a Swimming Parents Facebook group for everyone to catch up on previous live streams. We'll put in there topics of questions and up and coming streams as well. Me, Dan, I think Kev, you'll be in there a little bit as well to answer any questions as the months go along. Essentially, we want to keep this interaction going. So you can find that in the description of this live stream, but we'll be back in a month's time with another topic from around the swimming pool.
Yes, thank you very much for joining us, everyone, and we will catch you on the next one.
Cheers, guys. Everyone.